the Konica C35 EF. So I got this camera in a job lot with these two other cameras for just about $12, shipping included, and upon testing everything, I noticed that the Minolta Himatic 7S just doesn't work at all, not even the shutter, but it does have a nice Canonet lens hood. I don't know what camera it comes from or what lens it's supposed to be on, but it's just there. Not sure why it's on a Minolta camera, but that's just how it is. The Instax Mini 7 camera seems to function normally, but I can't say for sure because I've only tried it without film, and I probably never will try it with film because Instax is very expensive. But anyway, when I first tested the Konica, the shutter was firing, and after I inserted an LR44 battery, the light meter started moving. Because of this, I thought that the camera worked perfectly, but when I opened the door to put a test roll of film inside, I noticed that the light seals have almost completely disintegrated. And for those who don't know, most film cameras make use of a kind of foam in the film door to prevent any light from leaking into the film from the back. Unfortunately, I wasn't able to record any footage of the bad light seals because, well, I wasn't thinking of making this into a video in the first place, but regardless, I cleaned up what was left of the old seals and installed some new makeshift light seals using black yarn, since I read online that that works fairly well. And well, surprisingly, the yarn that I have is pretty much the perfect width and it fit the camera extremely well. So after placing the yarn along the gaps in the door, I inserted a roll of Fomapan 200. Now before starting to shoot this roll, I tested the light meter and compared its readings to those of my DSLR, and from what I could tell, the readings on the Konica C35 EF varied from half a stop to a full stop overexposed compared to the DSLR. I think this might be the case because the Konica originally used 1.35 volt mercury batteries, which aren't produced anymore because, well, they're made of mercury, which of course is toxic. And modern alkaline LR44 batteries that fit in the compartment are 1.5 volts, so it's probably that voltage difference that's causing the difference in the readings. So because of this, I quote-unquote bracketed my shots when shooting this roll. I simply did this by shooting a third of the roll at box speed, a third of the roll while setting the ISO dial on the camera to half a stop underexposed, so basically setting it to 300 instead of 200, and the final one-third of the roll I underexposed by a full stop, so I set the ISO on the camera to 400 instead of 200. Now before taking a look at the photos, let me just quickly talk about this camera and its history. So in 1975, Konica released this camera, the Konica C35 EF, also known as the Picari in the Japanese market. It was the very first consumer compact camera with a built-in electronic flash. Now it wasn't the first 35mm film camera with a built-in flash. I haven't done much research regarding which one was actually the first, but the earliest I found within like 10 minutes was the Voigtlander Vitrona from 1964, 11 years before the Konica C35 EF released. By the way, the C35 EF which I have with me right now is not the original. Mine has a self-timer and an orange button for the flash, so that means it's actually the second model released in 1977. The original 1975 version had no self-timer and the flash had a black button. And speaking of the flash, mine does not work at all because the battery cover is just completely missing and the battery compartment is very corroded, likely because of a battery leakage. Andy Warhol also seemed to like this camera quite a bit, and I've read that at one point he even owned 3. However, I've only found a single photo of him with this camera, and I haven't found any photos by him that were actually taken with the camera. But if you find any, please let me know in the comments below, and if you send me like a link or something, I'll pin your comment so everyone else can see it. Also, every number and letter in the model number has a meaning, which is something that isn't that commonly seen nowadays. C35 means that it's a compact 35mm camera, and EF means that it has an electronic flash. Later on, the Konica C35AF would be released, and as you may have guessed, it contains something that the EF doesn't, and that's, well, AF, or autofocus. Anyway, here are the photos from the test roll of Fomapan 200 that I shot and developed in Rodinal 1+50 dilution. I found out that my intuition was right, and the camera was in fact overexposing by more or less one stop, so setting the ISO dial to 400 gave me the best exposures when developing at 200. For such a simple camera, I was quite surprised that the lens is so sharp, and even with a tiny bit of fungus, it focuses and shoots pretty much perfectly, and I'm very impressed. I will say though that since the camera uses zone focusing, where you can only select between a head, a half body, full body, and a mountain, it took a bit of getting used to. But anyway, a week later, I shot a roll of Shanghai GP3 with this camera, with the ISO dial set to 200, and with me developing at box speed or 100, also with Rodinal 1+50. And the shots look pretty good. Shanghai GP3 is quite far from my favorite film stock, but I still do like the vintage tonality that it has, even though it's such a dust magnet, to tell the truth. Anyway, that's about it for this video. Like I said last week, I'm going to resume the usual cassette videos starting next week, which you all seem to like anyway. And finally, I'll be combining July and August for the This Month's Photos video on the first week of September, because of course I wasn't able to make a July video on the first week of August because I got sick. Well, that's about it for me, so thank you all so much for watching, and I hope you're all having a wonderful morning, afternoon, or evening wherever you are, and I'll see you in the next video. Goodbye!